Case 1. Nancy Seaman. On the Wednesday following Mother's Day weekend in May 2004, a relative of Robert Seaman contacted the Farmington Hills Police Department in Oakland County, Michigan, to file a missing person report. Robert, a Ford Motor Company engineer, had not been seen or heard from since Sunday evening. When officers arrived at the family's home to speak with his wife, Nancy, a fourth-grade teacher at Longacre Elementary School, they did not find a missing person case. They found Robert's body, wrapped in a tarp and secured with duct tape, in the back of Nancy's Ford Explorer inside the garage. Nancy Ann D'Onofrio was born on May 13, 1952, in Lincoln Park, Michigan. She graduated as valedictorian of her high school class, met Robert Seaman in 1972, and they married a year later. For the first 2 decades of their life together, Nancy remained at home while Robert built his engineering career at Ford. They had 2 sons, Jeff, born in 1979, and Greg, born in 1981. In 1995, Nancy became an elementary school teacher in Farmington Hills, quickly building a reputation as patient, dedicated, and well-regarded. She was, by all external appearances, an award-winning educator embedded in the fabric of a stable, middle-class suburban community. By early 2004, the marriage had reached a critical fracture point. Robert and Nancy were no longer sharing the same floor of their house. Nancy had been arranging to purchase a condominium, initially framed as a residence for their son, Greg. But Robert eventually discovered the true nature of the purchase. On Sunday, May 9th, surveillance footage from a Home Depot captured Nancy purchasing a hatchet at 7:37 p.m., roughly 20 minutes after a dispute at the family home that prompted Jeff and his wife to leave. Nancy claimed she intended to clear a tree stump. The following morning, Mother's Day, was the last day Robert Seaman was seen alive. Prosecutors described what followed as methodical. Physical evidence indicated Robert had sustained at least 20 hatchet strikes and 22 stab wounds from a kitchen knife. Police alleged the attack originated in the kitchen, not the garage where Nancy would later claim she had been cornered. Within 48 hours, Nancy returned to Home Depot twice, first for duct tape, a tarp, bleach, and cleaning supplies, as then a second visit where surveillance captured her shoplifting a hatchet and attempting to return it, using the receipt from her original purchase. Every transaction had been logged, every visit recorded. Despite all of it, Nancy reported to school on May 10th, having been unable to reach a substitute in time. The case broke through the convergence of surveillance footage spanning 3 Home Depot visits, a body concealed inside a locked garage, and forensic reconstruction placing the attack in the kitchen. A UPS driver who recognized the vehicle description led officers to the home. Prosecutors argued the number and placement of wounds were flatly inconsistent with a brief defensive struggle. The trial began November 29th, 2004, and was broadcast nationally on Court TV. Prosecutors pushed premeditation, the hatchet purchased the night before, 3 hardware store trips in the aftermath, the concealed body. The defense argued battered woman syndrome, presenting Nancy as a survivor of 3 decades of abuse. Nancy testified on December 7th, describing a final confrontation in which Robert came at her with a kitchen knife, and she grabbed the hatchet in a moment of terrified, involuntary reaction, that she didn't remember the stabbing at all. The jury deliberated less than 5 hours before returning a unanimous verdict of first-degree premeditated murder on December 14th, 2004. Nancy was sentenced to mandatory life without parole on January 24th, 2005. The trial judge later reduced the conviction to second-degree murder, but the Michigan Court of Appeals reinstated the first-degree verdict in 2007. A federal judge subsequently granted a new trial on the grounds that the battered woman syndrome argument hadn't been fully developed. but a federal appellate court overturned that ruling, holding the defense was not recognized under Michigan law. Nancy Seaman remains incarcerated at Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility. The missing person report filed by Robert's relative was ultimately the thread that unraveled everything. The body in the Ford Explorer answered every question it had asked. What it could not answer, and what courts have debated for 2 decades, was what the first swing of that hatchet truly meant. Case 2. Ray Lewis. The first documented irregularity in the early morning events of January 31st, 2000, in Atlanta's Buckhead district was not a 911 call, not a weapon recovered, and not a body identified. It was the absence of a white suit. Ray Lewis, the Baltimore Ravens Pro Bowl linebacker, one of the most recognizable defensive players in professional football, had been wearing a custom white designer suit when he and his entourage left the Cobalt Lounge following a post-Super Bowl party. By the time police began collecting accounts from witnesses on East Paces Ferry Road, where 2 men lay dying, the suit was gone. It has never been found. Ray Anthony Lewis II was born on May 15, 1975, in Bartow, Florida. Raised primarily by his mother, he did not have a consistent relationship with his father, a detail Lewis himself would later cite as formative. He channeled his athleticism into football at Kathleen High School and then the University of Miami, and where his physicality and intensity drew immediate comparisons to the game's most dominant linebackers. The Baltimore Ravens selected him in the first round of the 1996 NFL Draft with the 26th overall pick. By his 4th season, he had become the anchor of one of the most ferocious defenses in NFL history. At 24 years old, Lewis was not simply a football player. He was a franchise identity on a trajectory that could end only at Canton. In the early hours of January 31st, hours after Super Bowl 34, concluded, Lewis and his associates, including Reginald Oakley and Joseph Sweeting, left the Cobalt Lounge. A second group from Akron, Ohio, was leaving at the same time. Verbal exchanges between the 2 groups became physical, and within approximately 90 seconds, 2 men from the Ohio group, Jacinth Baker, 21, and Richard Lawler, 24, were fatally stabbed. Both died from single stab wounds to the heart. Lewis and his companions departed in their rented limousine. A shot was reportedly fired at the vehicle as it left. When Lewis spoke with investigators the following morning, his account contained material omissions. The investigative turning point came not from forensic evidence, but from the accumulating weight of witness contradictions. Accounts diverged sharply on Lewis's role. Some described him attempting to separate the parties. At least one placed him as an active participant. More damaging was what followed. Witnesses in the limousine told investigators that Lewis instructed those present to stay silent. His white suit, which may have carried biological trace evidence, was never recovered. A Fulton County grand jury indicted Lewis, Oakley, and Sweeting on February 11, 2000, on 2 counts each of malice murder, felony murder, and aggravated assault. Lewis was released on a $1 million bond as national media prepared for gavel-to-gavel trial coverage. Then the case shifted. Several weeks into trial, Lewis's legal team negotiated a plea with Fulton County District Attorney Paul Howard. The murder charges against Lewis were dismissed. In exchange, he pleaded guilty to a single misdemeanor count of obstruction of justice and agreed to testify against Oakley and Sweeting. He received 12 months of probation and was later fined $250,000 by the NFL. Lewis took the stand, but his testimony produced no direct implication of either co-defendant. He stated he did not see knives, did not hear confessions, and identified no one as a perpetrator. The prosecution's case against Oakley and Sweeting went to the jury. Both men were acquitted. Lewis served no prison time The NFL fine was the most significant formal sanction he received from any institution. The following January, he was named Super Bowl MVP as the Ravens won Super Bowl 35, a development that, for the families of Jacinth Baker and Richard Lawler, arrived as a particular kind of institutional verdict. Lewis reached civil settlements with both families under undisclosed terms. No one has ever been convicted of the deaths of Baker and Lawler, the white suit that anchored the evidentiary imagination of investigators in those first hours, whose disappearance first flagged that something deliberate had occurred, was never recovered, never explained, and never replaced by anything conclusive. 2 men are dead, and no one answered for it. Case 3. Donna Scrivo, a UPS driver, changed everything. In late January 2014, St. Clair County authorities had circulated a description of a suspect vehicle, a late 1990s gray or tan SUV. After witnesses reported seeing a middle-aged woman disposing of garbage bags along rural roads in China Township, approximately 50 miles northeast of Detroit. Investigators had already found what those bags contained. It was the UPS driver's identification of a matching vehicle that connected the location, the bags, and the driver to an address in St. Clair Shores, and to a woman who, just days earlier, had filed a missing person report for her own son. Donna Scrivo was born in April 1954. She later built a professional life as a registered nurse in Michigan, a career requiring clinical training and demonstrated competence in medical procedure and human anatomy. Her younger son, Ramsey, born in 1981, had been diagnosed in adulthood with paranoid schizophrenia. Following his father's death, his condition deteriorated further. He had attempted suicide. In 2013, Donna was granted legal guardianship over him, and Ramsey was living with her in a St. Clair Shores condo. He was also on probation for a prior assault charge, required to submit to 5 at-home breathalyzer tests per day. His last recorded test was logged at approximately 7 p.m. on January 25, 2014. Ramsey Scrivo was never seen alive after that date. On January 27th, Donna contacted police and reported that her son had left the previous day for a walk toward a nearby 7-Eleven and had not returned. In a Carhartt jacket, flannel pajama bottoms, and Timberland boots on one of the coldest days Michigan had recorded in over a century. Then, on January 30th, a motorist in China Township witnessed something that ended the missing person inquiry entirely. A human head had rolled from a garbage bag onto the side of a rural road. Officers found 5 black bags in the vicinity containing human remains. An electric saw was recovered in one of the bags. Fingerprint testing confirmed the remains as Ramsey Scrivo. His right arm was never recovered. Autopsy results determined the cause of death as ligature strangulation, with a 4.5-inch ligature mark on the left side of Ramsey's neck. Toxicology revealed lethal concentrations of Xanax and 2 antidepressants in his system, consistent with investigators' theory that he had been rendered unconscious before the strangulation. Dismemberment had been performed with a power tool. The body had been distributed across 14 pieces. When officers entered the condo, the smell of bleach was immediate. A blood trail ran from the bathtub to the bedroom. Surveillance footage captured Donna purchasing a circular saw, the instrument believed used in the dismemberment, at a retail location. She acknowledged the purchase at trial, attributing it to a home improvement project. Trial convened in Macomb County Circuit Court in May 2015. Prosecutors presented the case as premeditated murder, the sedation of a physically larger, mentally vulnerable adult, ligature strangulation, and the deliberate, multi-day disposal of evidence across 50 miles. The defense contested the absence of Ramsey's DNA on his mother's person and argued the physical improbability of a 110-pound woman overpowering and moving a 235-pound man into a bathtub. Donna testified in her own defense, claiming she had discovered a masked man dressed in black standing over her son's body and had been held hostage for 5 days under threat that her other son would be killed if she didn't comply. Prosecutor William Cataldo called the account, in closing, simply fake. The jury deliberated less than 2 hours. On May 18, 2015, Donna Scrivo was convicted of first-degree premeditated murder and mutilation of a body and sentenced to mandatory life without parole, as the judge described the offense as mind-boggling and stated on the record that even Michigan's most severe punishment seemed insufficient. Donna maintained her innocence throughout, telling the court as she signed her sentencing paperwork that the judge was wrong. She remains incarcerated at Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility. The UPS driver who recognized her vehicle, a civilian passing through an ordinary workday, became the pivot on which the entire investigation turned. What began as a missing person report on a freezing January morning ended in a sentence from which there is no release. Case 4. Aaron Hernandez. A jogger discovered the body at approximately 5:30 in the morning on June 17, 2013, in a remote clearing inside an industrial park in North Attleboro, Massachusetts, roughly 1 mile from the home of New England Patriots tight end Aaron Hernandez. The victim had been shot 6 times. Within hours, surveillance footage from the neighborhood surrounding Hernandez's property had already documented the movement of a silver Nissan Altima in the pre-dawn hours, and investigators noted that a home security system installed by Hernandez himself had generated recordings that he subsequently attempted to disable. The attempt to destroy the system was one of the first anomalies investigators documented. Aaron Joseph Hernandez was born on November 6, 1989, in Bristol, Connecticut. He was raised in a working-class household, and by multiple accounts, his childhood was defined by both athletic pressure and significant family instability. His father, Dennis Hernandez Sr., was a disciplinarian who pushed his sons toward athletic excellence with an intensity that left psychological marks. When his father died suddenly from post-surgical complications in January 2006, Aaron was 16 years old. Within a year, he had enrolled at the University of Florida, where he joined one of the most dominant college football programs in the country, under head coach Urban Meyer. Hernandez was a first-team All-American tight end, a weapon of rare combination. His size, route running, and hands were extraordinary, and he helped the Gators win the 2009 BCS National Championship. Concerns about off-field conduct and behavioral red flags caused him to slip to the 4th round of the 2010 NFL Draft, where the New England Patriots selected him at pick 113. Despite the late-round selection, Hernandez developed rapidly into one of the most dangerous tight ends in the NFL. Alongside Rob Gronkowski, he formed part of arguably the most lethal tight end tandem the league had seen. He appeared in Super Bowl 46. In the summer of 2012, the Patriots rewarded him with a 5-year contract extension valued at approximately $40 million, making him one of the highest-paid tight ends in league history. On the night of June 14, 2013, Hernandez and Odin Lloyd, a 27-year-old linebacker for the semi-professional Boston Bandits who was dating the younger sister of Hernandez's fiancée, Shayana Jenkins, were together at Rumor nightclub in Boston. Investigators later noted that the evening ended with reported tension between the two men. Accounts varied on the specific nature of the disagreement, but prosecutors would later allege it was rooted in Hernandez's documented paranoia and a perceived betrayal involving Lloyd's associations with individuals Hernandez distrusted. In the early hours of June 17, Surveillance footage from the area near Lloyd's apartment in Dorchester showed a figure identified by investigators as Lloyd entering the rear passenger seat of a silver Nissan Altima. According to the prosecution's reconstruction, Hernandez had driven to Lloyd's residence accompanied by Carlos Ortiz and Ernest Wallace, two associates. The vehicle entered the North Attleboro Industrial Park between 3:23 and 3:27 a.m. Employees working in the vicinity reported hearing multiple gunshots in approximately that window. The Altima departed the area at approximately 3:30 a.m. Lloyd's body, shot 6 times, twice in the back and multiple times in the chest as he lay on the ground, was discovered by the jogger hours later. The investigation moved with unusual speed given the volume of digital and physical evidence available. Surveillance cameras outside Hernandez's home documented him inside the residence at approximately 3:30 a.m., holding what investigators described as a firearm. The rented Nissan Altima, returned to the Enterprise location the following day, was recovered before it could be processed through the facility. A spent .45 caliber shell casing was found inside the vehicle, along with soil consistent with the industrial park crime scene. Lloyd's fingerprints were identified inside the car. The driver's side mirror had been damaged, intact when Lloyd was last seen, and missing upon the vehicle's return. The single most significant forensic development came from a piece of gum. A chewing gum wrapper bearing Aaron Hernandez's DNA was recovered adjacent to a shell casing at the scene. Investigators also obtained Hernandez's text messages to Lloyd and to co-defendants on the night of the killing, which documented coordination and urgency in the hours leading to Lloyd's disappearance. On June 26, 2013, law enforcement officers arrived at Hernandez's North Attleboro home and placed him under arrest. 90 minutes later, the New England Patriots released him. The trial began on January 29, 2015, in Bristol County Superior Court in Fall River, Massachusetts. Prosecution team members William McCauley, Patrick Bomberg, Roger Michelle, and Brian Griffin constructed a case built almost entirely on circumstantial evidence. There was no eyewitness to the shooting itself, and the murder weapon was never recovered. The prosecution argued that Hernandez orchestrated Lloyd's death as a response to perceived disloyalty, framing Hernandez as volatile, paranoid, and deliberate. Defense attorneys Michael Fee, James Sultan, and Charles Rankin took a notable strategic position. They acknowledged Hernandez was present at the industrial park that night, but argued that the actual shooting was carried out by Ortiz or Wallace, not their client. The gum wrapper DNA, the surveillance footage, the rental car evidence, and the text message coordination proved persuasive. After a trial lasting more than 2 months, the jury convicted Hernandez of first-degree murder and 5 weapons charges on April 15, 2015. He was sentenced that same day to mandatory life in prison without the possibility of parole. Aaron Hernandez was transferred to the maximum security Souza Baranowski Correctional Center in Massachusetts. He was separately acquitted on April 14, 2017, of 2 first-degree murder charges related to a 2012 double homicide in Boston. 5 days later, on April 19, 2017, correctional officers found him unresponsive in his cell at 3:05 a.m., having apparently hanged himself with a bedsheet. He was 27 years old. On May 9, 2017, a Massachusetts Superior Court judge vacated his conviction under the legal doctrine of abatement ab initio, and which held that a defendant who dies while an appeal is pending is rendered legally innocent as the case reverts to its origin. The Massachusetts Supreme Court later reversed the vacatur in 2019, reinstating the conviction and formally abolishing the abatement doctrine as no longer consonant with contemporary legal standards. post-mortem examination of Hernandez's brain at Boston University's CTE Center revealed stage 3 chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the most severe case ever documented in a person under the age of 46. The jogger who found Odin Lloyd's body in that clearing on a June morning set the case in motion. What the investigation uncovered in the weeks that followed buried a career, a contract, and a life in that order. From a surveillance-saturated industrial park in Massachusetts, the next case moves to a high-rise hallway in Houston, where the weapon of record was neither a firearm nor a blade, and where blood spatter evidence told investigators a story no witness could fully contradict. Case 5. Ana Trujillo. The 911 call came in at 3:39 in the morning on June 9th, 2013, from a condominium in the Museum District of Houston, Texas. The caller was Ana Trujillo. She told the dispatcher she needed help. What responding officers found when they arrived 19 minutes later was a 59-year-old man, Alf Stefan Anderson, lying on the white carpet of the hallway outside his bedroom. The injuries to his face were so extensive that responding medical personnel initially assessed the wounds as consistent with a firearm discharge. The instrument that produced them was a blue suede stiletto pump, size 9, with a 5.5-inch heel, a pair of shoes that Anderson himself had purchased for Trujillo, and which investigators recovered near his head, its pointed tip coated in his blood. Alf Stefan Anderson was born in Sweden and immigrated to the United States in 1986, becoming an American citizen 10 years later. A biochemist by training, he had built a respected academic career that brought him to Houston, where he had been a visiting research professor at the University of Houston, considered an expert, with some precision of irony, in the field of female hormones. Colleagues and friends described him consistently as quiet, private, and mild-mannered, a man who listened carefully in conversation and kept his personal life largely to himself. His professional environment regarded him as accomplished and dedicated. He had been briefly married in his 30s, but had otherwise remained a bachelor. He had a documented history of alcohol dependence that had led the university to refer him to a rehabilitation program in 2010. He relapsed and was drinking heavily by the time he met Ana Trujillo in August 2012. Ana Lilia Trujillo, a native of Mexico, was 45 at the time of Anderson's death. Prior to the case, she had been associated in limited capacity with Houston's media environment, including brief television appearances. By the summer of 2013, she and Anderson were involved in a relationship that witnesses and subsequent testimony described as volatile. On the evening of June 8th, 2013, moving into the early hours of June 9th, Anderson and Trujillo spent time together at a neighborhood bar near the Museum District. Surveillance footage from the bar and from the lobby of Anderson's condominium building documented their movements. Investigators noted that the footage showed Anderson entering the elevator with his head down, appearing in the assessment of one prosecutor, defeated. A cab driver who transported the couple from the bar to the condominium testified at trial that Trujillo was loud and visibly agitated during the ride. Anderson's packed luggage was, according to the defense, positioned near the front door of the condo. Trujillo claimed she had been in the process of moving out and that Anderson resisted her departure. According to prosecutors, the altercation that followed in the condominium's hallway began with Anderson falling or being knocked onto his back. Trujillo then, investigators alleged, he positioned herself over him in a straddling posture and struck him in the face and head with the heel of her stiletto at least 25 times. A neighbor in the building reported hearing a man scream at approximately 2:13 a.m. No woman's voice was reported. The blood spatter analysis became the centerpiece of the investigative reconstruction. and ultimately the most consequential evidence at trial. Harris County investigator Christopher Duncan, working with the pattern of cast-off blood on the hallway wall, the saturation of Trujillo's jeans with Anderson's blood, and the positioning of the body, concluded that the strikes had been delivered from above while Anderson was on his back, not from a defensive or upright position. Prosecutor John Jordan would later demonstrate this positioning using a mannequin and the actual stiletto during trial. Trujillo had stated to investigators in a recorded interrogation that she struck Anderson only a couple of times and did not realize she had seriously injured him until she saw blood on the floor. She also stated she attempted CPR. The autopsy conducted by medical examiner Dr. Jennifer Ross documented 25 individual contusions and lacerations consistent with the stiletto's pointed tip, primarily to Anderson's face and neck, and classified the cause of death as blunt force head and facial trauma, homicide. Defensive wounds, bruising, and abrasions on Anderson's hands and wrists were documented as consistent with an attempt to shield his face from the blows. Additionally, two witnesses presented by the prosecution testified to a separate incident approximately 2 weeks before Anderson's death, during which Trujillo had allegedly attacked one of them without provocation, biting his head and pulling skin from his skull. At no point during the 911 call did Trujillo state to the dispatcher that she had been in fear for her life. The trial in Harris County's 338th District Criminal Court opened in late March 2014, with Judge Brock Thomas presiding. Prosecutor John Jordan and co-prosecutor Sarah Mickelson presented the blood spatter analysis as the structural core of the state's case, arguing that the physical evidence decisively refuted the self-defense narrative. Defense attorney Jack Carroll, who would later state he genuinely believed in his client's innocence, he argued that Anderson, described by the defense as a physically larger, aggressive alcoholic, had initiated the confrontation and that Trujillo reached for the closest available object to protect herself. Carroll also challenged the prosecution's characterization of the weapon, arguing the shoe was more accurately a platform pump than a pointed stiletto. The jury heard from the defense that Trujillo had injuries of her own, though prosecutors countered that Anderson had no recorded history of violence and that no evidence supported the claim he was the aggressor. The prosecution's closing argument pointed specifically to the absence of any self-defense statement to emergency services. If Trujillo had genuinely feared for her life, no such statement had been made before or after the call ended. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. On April 8, 2014, Ana Trujillo was convicted of murder. The jury later returned for the punishment phase of the proceedings, and on April 11, 2014, she was sentenced to life in prison. Trujillo appealed, and the sentence was affirmed. She remains incarcerated at the Gatesville Correctional Facility, approximately 200 miles northwest of Houston. The blue suede stiletto, cataloged as State's Exhibit 56 and carried by the prosecutor himself to the mannequin during trial, remained in evidence, the most photographed object in a case that circulated in headlines across 5 continents. Anderson had bought those shoes for the woman who would use them to end his life. The 911 call she made after he was dead was the first evidence investigators had. The blood spatter on the wall was the last word they needed. Where the last case involved a weapon of striking specificity, the case that follows returns to a firearm. But in a setting that no true crime documentary script can fully account for, a family living room in Los Angeles, where 2 young boys watched their father shoot their mother and heard the words he said before he fired a second time. Case 6. Michael Jace. The 911 call came in at approximately 8:30 in the evening on May 19, 2014, from a residence in the Hyde Park neighborhood of South Los Angeles. The caller was Michael Jace. His words to the operator were direct and unambiguous. He had shot his wife. A second call, placed almost simultaneously, came from April Jace's father, who had received a text message from his son-in-law instructing him to come collect the children because he had shot April. When Los Angeles Police Department officers arrived at the house, they found April Jace, 40, dead from multiple gunshot wounds. The couple's two sons, ages 8 and 5, were present in the home. Neither boy was physically harmed. Both had heard everything. Michael Andrew Jace was born on July 13, 1962, in Paterson, New Jersey. He began his professional acting career in the early 1990s, first appearing in a 1992 episode of Law and Order, then accumulating a series of small but recognizable film and television roles across the decade. He appeared in Forrest Gump in 1994, playing a Black Panther member. He had roles in Boogie Nights, The Fan, Strange Days, and The Replacements, is building the kind of resume that placed him regularly in mainstream productions without elevating him to leading man status. The role that defined his public identity came in 2002 when he was cast as LAPD officer Julian Lowe in the FX drama The Shield, a critically acclaimed, intensely gritty police procedural set in a fictional inner-city Los Angeles precinct. Jace appeared in 89 episodes over the show's 7-season run, portraying a character who began as a rookie and rose to the rank of detective. The series ended in 2008. He had a recurring role on Southland from 2009 to 2012. By the time of his arrest in 2014, Jace had been married to April, a financial aid counselor at Biola University in La Mirada, whom colleagues described as warm, energetic, and committed to helping students, for 9 years. They had 2 young sons together. Behind the professional exterior, court documents obtained by CNN indicated that Jace was under acute financial pressure in the years preceding the shooting. He had defaulted on the $411,000 mortgage on the Hyde Park home where the shooting would occur. According to the prosecution's reconstruction, April Jace returned home from a baseball game with their sons on the evening of May 19, 2014, at approximately 8 p.m. Investigators determined that Michael had retrieved a revolver belonging to April's father before she arrived. Prosecutor Tanaz Mokayev told jurors that Jace was in a state of extreme emotional agitation, having become convinced that his wife was having an extramarital affair and was preparing to file for divorce. No evidence was introduced at trial to support the belief that she was being unfaithful. According to investigators, as April entered the house, Jace shot her once in the back. She fell. Jace then fired twice more, striking her in each leg. The couple's 10-year-old son, who testified at trial, told the jury he heard his father say, before the second shot, that if April liked running, she should run to heaven. April Jace was an avid runner. She was found on the floor of the family home, dead from her wounds. Jace called 911, confirmed the shooting to the operator, and remained at the scene. Investigators arriving that evening were in the unusual position of confronting a scene where the shooter had self-reported and had not fled. Michael Jace was taken in for questioning that night and, in a recorded interview with detectives, provided an account that became central to the trial. And he told investigators he had retrieved the firearm with the intention of shooting himself, but had been unable to carry through with it. He then, he stated, decided instead to shoot April in the leg, to cause her pain equivalent to what he was experiencing. The recorded confession established his presence, his weapon, and his intent. However, his characterization of the act as impulsive and pain-driven, rather than calculated, formed the foundation of the defense's argument. A secondary evidentiary development emerged during the investigation's digital phase. The LAPD successfully cracked the password protection on April's iPhone 5C, gaining access to her communications. The contents of that phone informed the prosecution's understanding of the state of the marriage in the weeks before the shooting and contributed to the timeline of escalating domestic tension documented by investigators. Financial records further established that the family's economic circumstances had deteriorated significantly, a context prosecutors used to frame the pressures bearing on Jace in the lead-up to the crime. The trial in Los Angeles County Superior Court lasted approximately 1 week. Deputy District Attorney Tanaz Mukayev pursued a first-degree murder conviction, arguing the crime was premeditated, that Jace had retrieved the weapon, waited for his wife, and shot her in the back before taunting her and shooting her again. Defense attorney Jamin Hicks did not dispute that Jace had killed April. His argument was framed around degree. He contended that the killing occurred in an emotional collapse without deliberation, and that the facts supported voluntary manslaughter rather than first or second-degree murder. Hicks told the jury his client had snapped, that there was no evidence of plotting or methodical planning, and that the prosecution had oversold the case. The testimony of the couple's 10-year-old son, recounting the remark about running to heaven, was among the most significant moments of the trial. A statement made by Jace to investigators, in which he said he intentionally shot April in the legs so that she, as a talented runner, would feel his pain, was also introduced into evidence and weighed against his claim of involuntary emotional breakdown. The jury, 6 men and 6 women, and deliberated for less than 3 hours. On May 31st, 2016, Michael Jace was convicted of second-degree murder. He was sentenced on June 10th, 2016, to 40 years to life in prison, 15 years to life on the murder conviction, and an additional 25 years to life on the firearms enhancement for personal and intentional use. At sentencing, Jace addressed the court and April's family, stating there was no justification for what he had done that night, and expressing remorse. April's mother, Kay Henry, walked out of the courtroom in the middle of his statement. California's 2nd District Court of Appeal affirmed the conviction, finding compelling evidence of the malice required for second-degree murder. The California Supreme Court declined to hear the case. The appellate court did return the matter to the trial court on one procedural issue: discretionary firearm enhancement review under a new state law. But Jace's sentence remained effectively intact. He is currently incarcerated in California State Prison. His sons, who were 8 and 5 years old when their mother was killed in the house where they were standing, are now young adults. The 911 call Michael Jace placed that night, the one where he reported having shot his wife himself, was where the case began and, in many ways, where it ended. He handed investigators the confession before they had even stepped through the door, where that case ended in a recorded voice on a telephone line. The next begins with a name that once made the whole country laugh. A teenage girl whose weeks-long case of uncontrollable hiccups made her a morning television fixture, and whose path from that moment of innocent viral fame led, 3 years later, to a murder in St. Petersburg, Florida, that no one who had watched her on the Today Show could have anticipated. Case 7, Jennifer Mee. The digital trail that first connected investigators to Jennifer Mee was not a wiretap, not a surveillance camera, and not a forensic submission. It was a social network friend request. In October 2010, Street, the Petersburg Police Department investigators reviewing the circumstances surrounding the fatal shooting of 22-year-old Shannon Griffin, found dead of multiple gunshot wounds on a residential street, traced the origin of the encounter to an online connection. Griffin had accepted a friend request from a woman he did not appear to know personally and had agreed to meet her based on that contact. He had no way of knowing who she actually was. or what was waiting at the destination she had selected. Within hours of Griffin's death, all 3 individuals who had been present at the scene were in custody. Jennifer Ann Mee was born on July 28, 1991, in St. Petersburg, Florida. She grew up in a working-class household in Pinellas County, and by all accounts of her early years, led an ordinary adolescence until January 2007, when, at 15 years old, she developed a medically unusual case of hiccups that persisted without resolution for more than 5 consecutive weeks. At her most acute, she was documented hiccuping approximately 50 times per minute. The condition was unexplained, and its very inexplicability attracted the attention of national media during a news cycle that had little competing for morning television airtime. Mee appeared multiple times on NBC's Today Show. She was featured on news programs across the country and received attention from international outlets. She consulted medical specialists, a hypnotist, and an acupuncturist. She became, briefly and improbably, a household name, the Hiccup Girl, a teenager whose affliction had somehow become appointment television. The hiccups eventually resolved, and reportedly through medication used to treat Tourette's syndrome. Her attorney would later argue that the hiccups were themselves a symptom of that neurological condition. Within a few years of her media moment, Mee's life had moved in a direction wholly disconnected from morning show segments and well-wishers. In June 2007, she was reported as a runaway. She became involved with Lamont Newton, who would later become her boyfriend and a co-defendant. By 2010, she was 19 years old and living in St. Petersburg with Newton and another man, Laren Rayford. According to the prosecution's reconstruction, the 3 had developed a pattern of using social media to identify and approach potential robbery targets, arranging meetings under false pretenses, and then robbing them once they arrived at selected locations. When Shannon Griffin, a Walmart employee from St. Petersburg, had connected with Mee online and, investigators alleged, was told the meeting on October 23, 2010 would involve a marijuana transaction. He arrived at a vacant home on 7th Street in St. Petersburg. Mee led him around to the back of the property, where Newton and Rayford were waiting. What followed, in the prosecution's account, was an attempted robbery at gunpoint. Griffin resisted. During the struggle that ensued, he was shot 4 times. Investigators were unable to determine which of the 2 men, Newton or Rayford, had pulled the trigger on the .38 caliber handgun. Mee herself was not alleged to have been the shooter. Griffin died at the scene. The amount taken from him in the robbery was less than $50. The investigation closed rapidly. All 3 suspects were arrested within hours of Griffin's death. Mee, Newton, and Rayford were each taken into custody and questioned by St. Petersburg police. During the process, Mee made statements to investigators that she would later be unable to walk back entirely. A jailhouse phone call recorded during her pre-trial detention proved particularly significant. In a call to her mother, Mee stated that she had not killed anyone, then added that she had set everything up and that it had all gone wrong. Prosecutors treated the statement as an admission to the planning and orchestration of the robbery. Forensic evidence added a biological dimension. Mee's DNA was identified on Shannon Griffin's shirt, placing her in direct physical proximity to the victim. Her co-defendant, Laren Rayford, was tried separately and convicted of first-degree murder in August 2013, receiving a life sentence. Rayford had rejected a prior plea offer of 40 years. The case against Mee went to trial in September 2013 in Pinellas County Circuit Court before Judge Nancy Moat Lay. The trial lasted 5 days. Prosecutor Christopher Labruzzo argued that the felony murder rule under Florida law was unambiguous in its application. Mee had organized and initiated a robbery, a qualifying serious felony, and a homicide had occurred in the course of that robbery. under Florida statute, her role as the architect of the encounter. The person who made contact with the victim selected the location and led him to the point of ambush, made her as culpable as the man who fired the weapon. Defense attorney John Trevina presented two parallel arguments. First, that Mee had not participated in the robbery itself and was a bystander to the shooting. Second, that her neurological condition, Tourette's syndrome, and a diagnosis of schizophrenia, for which a competency evaluation had been ordered and completed before trial, had impaired her judgment and capacity in ways the jury should weigh. Trevina did not call Mee to the stand. The defense also suggested, with limited evidentiary support, that a fourth individual, a woman named Jennifer Cherin, who had been a prosecution witness, had also been present at the scene and bore a greater share of responsibility than the state acknowledged. The jailhouse call was played for the jury. The DNA evidence was introduced. On October 24, 2013, all 12 jurors returned a unanimous verdict of first-degree murder. Jennifer Mee was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lamont Newton was subsequently convicted as well. Mee remained incarcerated in the Florida Department of Corrections system. In 2016, author M. William Phelps published a book examining the case in full. Subsequent legal efforts by Mee's legal team included arguments that the felony murder rule, as applied to someone whose role was limited to establishing the encounter, rather than committing physical violence, represented a disproportionate application of criminal liability. Those efforts did not produce a sentence modification. Mee the Hiccup Girl of 2007, the 15-year-old who had been hugged on national television by a country music star, was serving a sentence from which there was no exit. The social media friend request that set everything in motion was the first digital breadcrumb. It was also the last one Griffin ever followed. The next case moves from a Florida neighborhood to a Compton parking lot, where a surveillance camera captured everything, and where the most powerful executive in the history of hip-hop discovered that footage recorded in 4 minutes can close a door that 20 years of legal complexity could not reopen. Case 8, Marion Suge Night. The surveillance footage from outside Tam's Burgers on West Rosecrans Avenue in Compton, California, recorded the entire incident on January 29, 2015, in under 4 minutes, as investigators reviewing the footage did not face the evidentiary challenge of reconstructing events from partial angles or disputed witness accounts. The camera showed Marion Suge Knight's red Ford F-15 Raptor backing into one man, then accelerating forward over another. It showed the sequence, the direction of travel, and the outcome. What the footage could not answer, and what 3.5 years of legal proceedings would battle over, was the question of what, at that precise moment, Knight intended. Marion Hugh Knight Jr. was born on April 19, 1965, in Compton, California. He was a physically imposing presence from an early age, a standout athlete who played football at Linwood High School and later at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, into where he also pursued a degree before entering the NFL during the 1987 players' strike as a replacement player for the Los Angeles Rams. His football career produced no lasting professional opportunities, but his transition into the music industry would reshape American popular culture. In the early 1990s, Knight co-founded Death Row Records alongside Dr. Dre, leveraging a combination of industry connections, financial backing from a convicted drug trafficker, and an aggressive personal style that set him apart from every other executive in the business. Death Row became the dominant label of West Coast hip-hop at its commercial and cultural apex. The label released Dr. Dre's The Chronic in 1992, Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style in 1993, and a succession of commercially overwhelming records that generated estimated revenues of approximately $100 million per year at the height of the mid-1990s boom. Knight signed Tupac Shakur in 1995, reportedly helping to secure his release from prison. On September 7, 1996, Knight and Shakur attended a boxing match in Las Vegas together. Shakur was shot in a drive-by attack that night while riding in Knight's BMW and died 6 days later. Knight was present and survived with a fragment wound to the head. The murder of Tupac Shakur remains unsolved. Knight served 5 years in prison beginning in 1997 for a probation violation related to an assault. And during his incarceration, Death Row Records collapsed financially and eventually entered bankruptcy. By the time of his 2015 arrest, when Knight had been through a prior federal weapons conviction, a subsequent parole violation resulting in additional incarceration, and a near-fatal shooting at a Los Angeles area nightclub in August 2014. He had not held executive control of Death Row in over a decade. On January 29, 2015, the NWA biopic Straight Outta Compton, which would go on to gross over $200 million worldwide, had a promotional video production underway in the Compton area. Cleabone Sloan, a longtime Compton figure and anti-violence activist who had appeared in the film Training Day, was working as a technical consultant on the production. According to the prosecution's account and the wrongful death suit filed by Terry Carter's family, Knight arrived at the filming area and had a prior confrontation with individuals connected to the production. An altercation between Knight and Sloan followed later at the parking lot of Tam's Burgers on West Rosecrans. Investigators determined that the two men had been engaged in a physical fight through the window of Knight's truck. Terry Carter, 55, a respected Compton businessman, lowrider car builder, and co-founder of a record label with Ice Cube, was at the location and was documented as attempting to intervene in or mediate the dispute. According to the surveillance footage, Knight first reversed his truck, striking Sloan, who sustained 2 crushed ankles and a serious head laceration. Knight then drove the vehicle forward, running over Carter. Carter died from multiple blunt force injuries within the hour. Knight departed the scene, abandoned the truck, and turned himself into authorities at approximately 3 a.m. the following morning. He was arrested and charged with murder, attempted murder, and 2 counts of hit and run. The investigation centered on the question of intent, and the surveillance footage, while documenting the physical sequence with clarity, did not resolve it. Knight's legal team cycled through what would eventually reach 16 attorneys over the course of the case, a procedural fact that itself became a recurring element of courtroom proceedings. The defense argument, from multiple iterations of representation, rested on a self-defense claim. Knight alleged that Sloan had been armed with a firearm and that he had acted in a panic to escape what he believed was an immediate physical threat. Sloan denied possessing a weapon. No firearm was recovered from the scene. 2 of Knight's attorneys were separately arrested in January 2018 on charges that they had attempted to bribe potential witnesses in the murder case, an independent criminal proceeding that added a further layer of documented obstruction to the legal timeline. The wrongful death lawsuit filed by Terry Carter's family in June 2015 alleged the confrontation was foreseeable and that the production environment had placed crew members in an area without adequate security arrangements. After more than 3 years of court proceedings, hospitalizations, legal delays, and multiple continuances, Knight's trial in Los Angeles County Superior Court before Judge Ronald Cohen was scheduled to begin on October 1st, 2018. 11 days before jury selection was set to commence, Knight accepted a plea agreement. On September 20th, 2018, he entered a no-contest plea to voluntary manslaughter, a plea that under California law carries the same legal weight as a guilty plea. the murder charge, the attempted murder charge, and 2 additional 2014 cases involving a robbery and criminal threats against Straight Outta Compton. Director F. Gary Gray were dismissed as part of the arrangement. The plea agreement was reached in part because Knight's prior felony convictions triggered California's 3 strikes law. Voluntary manslaughter would ordinarily carry an 11-year sentence. The 3 strikes enhancement doubled it, and additional enhancements for the nature of the offense and the use of the vehicle as a deadly weapon brought the total to 28 years in state prison. Knight was sentenced on October 4th, 2018, by Judge Cohen, who stated he had spent 45 years in the criminal justice system and had seen more violent death than he could enumerate. Knight listened without expression as Carter's family delivered statements from the courtroom floor. Marion Suge Knight, now 60 years old, is incarcerated at a San Diego area state prison facility. With California's maximum good behavior credits and time already served, he could theoretically become eligible for parole consideration after serving approximately 19 years from the date of his sentencing. The wrongful death civil suit brought by Carter's family resulted in a hung jury. And, as of the date of this documentary's production, a retrial in that matter was still pending. The surveillance footage from the Tams Burgers parking lot, leaked in the immediate aftermath of the incident by TMZ and viewed millions of times, answered every visual question investigators had before they had finished filing their initial report. What it could not resolve was everything that led to that parking lot: the relationships, the rivalry, the industry, the decades of violence. The camera captured 4 minutes. The case required nearly 4 years. The next case travels from a Compton parking lot to a mountain community outside Park City, Utah, where the death of a man in the early hours of a March morning looked to the first officers who arrived like a medical emergency. It would take more than a year before the investigation revealed the full picture of what had been placed in his drink. Case 9. Kouri Richins. The 911 call came in just after 3 a.m. on March 4th, 2022, from a home in Kamas, Utah, a small mountain community approximately 40 miles southeast of Salt Lake City. The caller was Kouri Richins. She reported finding her husband, Eric, unresponsive. Paramedics responded and declared him dead at the scene. The medical examiner, who subsequently performed the autopsy, documented the cause of death as fentanyl toxicity, specifically a concentration of the synthetic opioid in Eric Richins' blood, measuring approximately 5 times the quantity considered lethal. The medical examiner further determined the fentanyl was of illicit, non-pharmaceutical origin and had been ingested orally. Only Kouri Richins and their 3 young children had been present in the home that night. The investigation that followed did not close within weeks or months. It closed 14 months later, in May 2023, when Kouri Richins was arrested and charged with aggravated murder. Between the 911 call and the arrest, she had written a book. Kouri Richins, née Powell, grew up in Utah. She married Eric Richins in 2013 as his second wife, and a prenuptial agreement established the financial boundaries of the marriage with precision. Neither would hold rights to the other's separate property, with one explicit exception. If Eric died while the two remained lawfully wed, she would inherit his estate. Eric worked in construction and real estate development and had accumulated assets that prosecutors would later value at more than $4 million. Kouri operated her own real estate business, projecting an image of material success, a well-appointed home near a ski resort community, a social media activity consistent with affluence, while simultaneously, prosecutors alleged, accumulating debt. At the time of Eric's death, investigators documented her total outstanding obligations at approximately $4.5 million. She had been paying multiple payday lenders simultaneously, at one point remitting roughly $2,100 per day across 4 separate lenders. In the years between 2015 and 2017, prosecutors alleged Kouri had taken out 4 separate life insurance policies on Eric, without his knowledge. Eric, for his part, had grown suspicious of his wife's financial conduct. He had attempted, in the period before his death, to remove her as beneficiary from his insurance and to revise his will accordingly. He was also, testimony at trial established, considering divorce, and he was not aware that Kouri had already identified the one contractual path by which she stood to inherit everything. On the night of March 3rd, moving into the early hours of March 4th, 2022, according to a statement Kouri gave to law enforcement, she and Eric had drinks together at their Kamas home, celebrating, she said, the closing of a real estate transaction. Writings recovered from the home indicated the drinks included a Moscow Mule and a lemon drop shot. Eric Richins was found unresponsive hours later. The toxicology results, when they returned, established a fentanyl concentration so elevated that the medical examiner described it as indicating not only a lethal intent, but an emphatic one. Prosecutors at trial would characterize the dosage as reflecting a desire to ensure death, not merely cause it. The investigation, initially handled by Summit County, proceeded carefully. Eric's family members, including his sister, came forward to law enforcement with information they had withheld in the immediate aftermath of his death, including an account that Eric had told family members he believed his wife had previously tried to harm him during a trip to Greece. Investigators subsequently identified what prosecutors alleged was an earlier poisoning attempt, a fentanyl-laced sandwich left in Eric's truck on Valentine's Day, weeks before his death, which had caused him to break out in hives and briefly lose consciousness. That incident became the basis for a separate charge of attempted aggravated murder at trial. The investigative picture that assembled over the following year was built on financial records, cell phone data, digital search history, and a network of individuals connected to Kouri's procurement of illicit fentanyl. A housekeeper who worked for the Richins family, Carmen Lauber, became a key prosecution witness, testifying that Kouri had asked her multiple times in early 2022 for pills, specifically referring to the substance she wanted as the Michael Jackson drug, a phrase prosecutors argued referenced the drug combination that killed the musician. Cell phone location data placed Lauber and a supplier near a gas station in Draper, Utah, on February 11th and February 26th of 2022. Eric died 6 days after the February 26th transaction. A handyman connected to the household had also made statements to investigators about Kouri inquiring about fentanyl. Kouri's internet search history, recovered during the digital forensic review, included queries for the lethal dose of fentanyl and for luxury prisons. In the months following Eric's death, Kouri had spent $1.35 million in life insurance proceeds within 90 days, closed on a $2.9 million mansion property the same day her husband died, and in the spring of 2023, self-published a children's picture book titled Are You With Me?, dedicated, as written in its pages, to her amazing husband. The book depicted a father with angel wings, watching over his young son, and was promoted in interviews as a tool to help grieving children, including her own 3 boys. The trial began in Summit County Circuit Court in Park City, Utah, in February 2026, before Judge Richard Mrazek. The prosecution, led by Chief Prosecutor Brad Bloodworth, presented 42 witnesses across 13 days of testimony. The financial motive was presented as foundational. Kouri was millions of dollars in debt, believed she would inherit Eric's estate, and had been conducting a romantic affair with another man, Robert Josh Grossman, who testified about the relationship, emotional during his appearance on the stand. the Valentine's Day poisoning attempt, the fentanyl procurement chain, the digital search history, the insurance policies, and the same-day mansion closing, assembled into what prosecutors characterized as a multi-step, financially motivated plan carried out across several weeks. Bloodworth told the jury in his closing argument that the fentanyl concentration in Eric's blood showed Kouri wanted him not only dead, but definitively so. The defense, led by attorney Wendy Lewis, argued that the state had never established the mechanism of delivery beyond speculation, that prosecutors had waited until closing arguments to suggest the cocktail as the vector without direct evidence, and that the investigation had been shaped by confirmation bias from the outset, pursuing only evidence consistent with Kouri's guilt. The defense also pointed to evidence that Eric may have had his own painkiller dependency, which investigators had not fully explored. The defense rested without calling a single witness. Kouri Richins did not testify. The jury deliberated for approximately 3 hours. On March the 16th, 2026, Kouri Richins was convicted on all counts: aggravated murder, attempted aggravated murder, 2 counts of insurance fraud, and forgery. She bowed her head as the verdict was read. Sentencing is scheduled for May 13th in 2026, which would have been Eric Richins' 44th birthday. The aggravated murder conviction carries a mandatory minimum of 25 years and a maximum of life in prison without parole. A separate trial on 26 additional financial crime charges remains pending. The children's grief book she self-published, written evidence at trial revealed, largely by a ghostwriter, remained in the public record, a document whose irony no amount of courtroom argument could fully absorb. The 911 call she placed in the darkness of a March morning in Utah was the beginning of a legal process that ended 4 years later, exactly where the evidence had always pointed. Where the last case was built on what Kouri Richins put into a glass, but the case that closes this documentary is built on what a former NFL first-round draft pick put into a Corvette, a speed and a blood alcohol level that together produced, on a Las Vegas road before dawn, the most catastrophic moment of his life and the last moment of someone else's. Case 10. Henry Ruggs III. The airbag control module recovered from a 2020 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray in Las Vegas, Nevada, recorded precisely what the vehicle had been doing in the seconds before impact on the morning of November 2nd, 2021. The module, a standard onboard data recorder, logged the Corvette's speed as 156 miles per hour in the moments before it reached the intersection of Rainbow Boulevard and Spring Valley Parkway. The posted speed limit on that stretch of road was 45 miles per hour. It was approximately 3:39 in the morning. The Corvette struck the rear of a Toyota RAV4, traveling at just over 43 miles per hour. The force of the collision propelled Tinter's SUV 571 feet from the point of impact. The gas tank ruptured. The vehicle caught fire. The data module did not record the outcome, but the responding officers who arrived at the scene of the burning car documented everything the machine could not. Henry Ruggs III was born on January 24th, 1999, in Montgomery, Alabama. He grew up in a working-class household and, from an early age, developed into an athlete of rare natural capability. His speed was the defining attribute, measurable, documentable, and by the time he reached the University of Alabama, recognized as among the most elite in college football. He played as a wide receiver for the Crimson Tide under head coach Nick Saban, while appearing alongside future first-round picks in a program that had become the standard bearer for NFL talent development. In the spring of 2020, the Las Vegas Raiders selected Ruggs in the first round of the NFL draft with the 12th overall pick, making him the first wide receiver taken in that draft class. ahead of players who would go on to have significant NFL careers. He was 20 years old. The contract that accompanied a first-round selection represented a life-altering financial commitment, guaranteed money, immediate professional standing, and an entry into an organization that had just relocated to Las Vegas and was building an identity around young talent. Ruggs appeared in 20 games across 2 NFL seasons, showed flashes of the explosive deep threat capability that had made him a first-round selection, and was building toward what the Raiders had invested in when the season that would end his career was 7 games old. On the evening of November, first moving into the early hours of November 2nd, 2021, Henry Ruggs III was at Topgolf, an entertainment and dining venue located near the Las Vegas Strip, with a group that included his fiancée and the mother of his daughter, Kiara Jenai Kilgo Washington. A police investigation subsequently obtained an itemized receipt from the venue that documented the group's tab. 20 drinks, the majority containing tequila, billed under Kilgo Washington's name. Investigators determined the group also spent approximately 3 hours at a friend's residence before Ruggs and Kilgo Washington departed in the Corvette. At approximately 3:39 a.m., Ruggs was driving southbound on Rainbow Boulevard, and he did not slow before reaching Spring Valley Parkway. Tina Tintor, a 23-year-old Serbian immigrant who had graduated from a Las Vegas high school, worked at a local Target store and had been working toward her U.S. citizenship while pursuing computer programming studies, was driving her RAV4 in the same corridor. Her golden retriever, Max, was in the vehicle with her. The Corvette reached her from behind at 156 miles per hour. The resulting fire burned for long enough that investigators initially assessed the physical damage to the RAV4 before the flames had been fully extinguished. Tina Tintor and Max died from thermal injuries. Ruggs, who remained at the scene, was transported to a hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. Kilgo Washington, his passenger, sustained injuries as well. At the hospital, Ika blood draw taken approximately 2 hours after the crash documented Ruggs' blood alcohol content at 0.161%, more than twice Nevada's legal limit of 0.08%. Ruggs refused the field sobriety test at the scene, a decision his defense team would later attempt to leverage. The legal battle over the admissibility of the blood draw result became the central investigative and pre-trial dispute in the case. Ruggs' attorneys, David Chesnoff and Richard Schoenfeld, 2 of Nevada's most prominent criminal defense lawyers, argued that the blood draw had been obtained without a proper warrant and that its results should be suppressed. Clark County District Attorney Steve Wolfson later acknowledged publicly that the blood test provided virtually the only direct proof of intoxication in the case, and that suppression of the evidence posed a genuine risk to the felony DUI charge, the most serious count Ruggs faced, and the one that carried the most significant potential sentence. Investigators had also compiled the Topgolf receipt, the witness accounts, and the vehicle data module, but the evidentiary architecture of the prosecution's case rested substantially on the blood draw result. The Raiders released Ruggs while he was still hospitalized. The announcement came the same day as the crash. He was 22 years old and no longer employed in professional football before his injuries had healed. The legal proceedings extended across nearly 2 years, punctuated by multiple court hearings, evidentiary disputes, and defense motions contesting the admissibility of key evidence. Ruggs remained on house arrest throughout, monitored by both a continuous alcohol-detecting ankle device and a GPS unit. He recorded no violations during the entire period. In May 2023, facing the risk that a trial could result in the suppression of the blood draw and potential acquittal on the felony DUI charge, both parties reached a plea agreement. Ruggs pleaded guilty to 1 felony count of DUI resulting in death and 1 misdemeanor count of vehicular manslaughter, The agreement required him to serve a prison sentence, foreclosed any appeal of the conviction, and resulted in the dismissal of several additional charges, including felony reckless driving. The plea was entered before Clark County District Court Judge Jennifer Schwartz, who presided over the sentencing hearing on August 9, 2023. Ruggs appeared in court in a dark suit and addressed the room briefly, and stating he had no excuse and directing an apology toward Tintor's family. A representative of Tintor's family also addressed the court, describing Tina as someone who had seen the beauty in every soul she encountered. Tintor's mother, Mirjana Kamazek, submitted a statement read by a cousin, describing what it had meant to lose a child and expressing with a grace that the courtroom received in silence a wish that Ruggs would be given the opportunity to watch his own daughter grow. Judge Schwartz sentenced Henry Ruggs III to a term of 3 to 10 years in Nevada State Prison, 3 to 10.5 years on the felony DUI count, with a concurrent 6-month sentence for the misdemeanor manslaughter charge. She described the case as among the most tragic she had encountered in her judicial tenure, and Ruggs is eligible for parole after 3 years. He did not receive credit for the time served on house arrest. The airbag control module that first documented 156 miles per hour, a number so far beyond the legal speed limit that investigators initially read it twice to confirm, became the first piece of evidence entered into the public record. It documented what a first-round NFL draft pick was doing on a city street in the hours before dawn. It could not account for why. Tina Tintor had been awake, driving home in the early hours of a Las Vegas morning, entirely unaware of what was behind her, and closing at more than twice the speed of anything a standard road is designed to accommodate. She had no time to react, neither did Max. The only thing that arrived before the Corvette did was the data that recorded it. 10 cases, in 10 people who occupied, at one point or another, a recognizable place in the public imagination. A classroom, a stadium, a television screen, a morning show green room, a recording studio, a Las Vegas practice facility. What the evidence ultimately produced in courtrooms from Oakland County to Summit County to Clark County was a different kind of public record, not of achievement, but of consequence. The names in this documentary do not belong to a single profession or a single failure. They belong to the permanent and uncomfortable truth that what a person is capable of cannot be read from the outside, and that the distance between a recognizable face and an unrecognizable act is, in every one of these cases, smaller than anyone watching ever thought it was.